Madeleine McCann's case is probably one of the biggest child abduction cases in history. This is my first ever YouTube true crime case. Crazy. You guys over on TikTok were begging me for a YouTube channel, so here we are. Thank you so much for your support, and this is the most requested case I have gotten, and it's a big one. There's a lot in it with a full timeline rundown of everything that happened in this case. We're going to go through all the theories. I'm going to say what I think happened personally. This video is purely educational. All information in this video has been taken from resources that you can find online. But I think we should just get straight into it. She's a long one. Sorry, I just moved my camera because I realised it looked like I was naked. So this case begins in 2007 when Madeleine was on holiday with her parents in Praia de Luz, Portugal. I'm sure we all know already the basics of this case. So it is May the 3rd at this point. They are staying at Ocean Club and Madeleine's parents go out for dinner. They are also on holiday with family friends. In total on this trip there were 9 adults and 8 children. There was David and Fiona and their 2 children. They also attended with Fiona's mum Diane. There was a couple called Matthew and Rachel who attended with their toddler. Jane and Russell who attended with their 2 children. Obviously the Mccanns, where there was the 2 parents, Kate and Jerry Mccann, Madeleine, their daughter, and then they also had a set of twins on this holiday. Mccann's were staying in the ground floor apartment. It was apartment 5A, and this apartment had 2 bedrooms, a living area, and a small kitchen, and it was publicly accessible from both streets outside of this apartment complex. So the Mccanns were in 5A. Next door in 5B was one of the other couples, and then next door but one in 5D was the other couple, and above them on the first floor was the 4th couple. They were all pretty close together. So after a couple of days the Mccanns actually stopped using the front door and would use the side door, which they would have to go up and down some steps which had a children's safety gate on it. That is just the way they preferred to get in and out of the apartment complex. So the tapas restaurant where all of the adults tended to go for food in the evening was about 100 yards from this apartment complex, and you could actually see the top of the apartment complex from where they'd sit, but you couldn't see the actual apartments themselves. You couldn't see the entrances and exits. It was not that far at all. However, the path to and from the apartment complex to the restaurant, it was well lit and it had easy access, so it was really easy for these adults to keep going and checking on the children. And I think this is quite important, this part. Madeleine slept in a single bed on her own, and she was by the bedroom door on the opposite side of the room where the bedroom window was. And I think that's important to bear in mind. And the twins were in travel cots in the middle of the room, so they were all staying in the same room. Outside of this bedroom window, straight opposite, there was a walkway and a residential car park. Now, there was also a low wall in between here, but you could still see out and in from this area. The adults on the trip had managed to speak to the restaurant owners and secured themselves a table every single night of their 7-day trip for 8:30 p.m. So they devised a little bit of a routine that every half an hour one of the adults would go back to the apartment complexes and just check on everybody's children. Thursday of their trip, which was the 3rd of May, the children were put to bed at around 7 p.m. Madeleine on this night was wearing pink and white Eeyore pyjamas. Just after 8:30 p.m, Jerry, who is Madeleine's dad, had gone to check on the kids. They were fine, so at this point him and his wife, Madeleine's mother, headed over to the tapas restaurant. At 9 p.m, they were seated at the restaurant and started ordering food and drinks. It was just before 9 p.m, Jerry went to do the first check. Now, Jerry said at this point he did notice that the children's bedroom was open a little bit more than they'd left it, or what he thought that they'd left it, but all the kids were still asleep in the same position as they were when they left. 9:08, he leaves the apartment again. He sees another holiday maker across the road, so he crosses over to have a little chat with him. 9:30 p.m, Kate then gets up to go and do the second check on the children. Space now between these 2 checks is quite short. To consider the time that Jerry was in there, he was outside talking to somebody else as well. But as Kate got up to go and check on her children, Matthew was actually going to go up and check on his daughter Grace, so he said, "Do you know what, I'll go and check on yours for you." Kate agrees, and as far as we are aware, everything is fine on this check too. 10 p.m. rolls around and Kate then gets up to go and do the checks. She heads into the apartment via the patio doors. She notices that the bedroom door to the children's room is open wider than left. This is when she enters the room and notices that Madeleine is gone. She's obviously very concerned at this point, but she checks around the bedroom, checks around the apartment to make sure that Madeleine is definitely not in the apartment. and she isn't. So obviously at this point she's panicking. Now Kate says that she ran back to the children's room and she notices that the curtains are moving from a gust of wind outside, so the bedroom window is open. As well as this, the shutters on the window are raised. It's said that Kate then runs back through the patio doors over to the group of people at the restaurant. I really want to try and not give my opinion too much. You think your daughter's been kidnapped, you run back out of the apartment and leave your other 2 children in there alone? Who am I to judge? As soon as Kate sees the table that they were sitting on, she's yelling, "Madeleine's gone, they've taken her. Someone's taken her." So they all start sprinting to the apartment, obviously, except for Diane, who stayed in the tapas area, as well as Jane, who was with her kids. When they arrive back to the children's bedroom, Jerry is looking at this window. Outside, he realises that the shutters can actually be raised from the outside. They split into pairs and start searching all the apartments around theirs. At this point, Kate is running around the car park screaming Madeleine's name, and Jerry asks Matt to go back to the Ocean Club and ask the staff to call the police. 10:11 p.m, police arrive on scene. Initially, the police's response is to suspect that Madeleine had just wandered off by herself. At midnight, they did make more police aware of the situation, who arrived just after 1 a.m. And then at around 2 a.m, patrol dogs were brought into the resort, and then another 4 search and rescue dogs, which arrived at 8 a.m. Police did put tape across the doorway into the children's bedroom, but didn't actually secure the apartment before leaving. The 1st of June, it was stated that DNA from a stranger was found in the apartment. But by this point, around 20 people had entered, been and gone in this apartment. The importance of securing a crime scene, why do we not know it yet? Apartment 5A, the one that the Mccanns were staying in, was kept vacant for a month. After a month, it was let out again to tourists. But then in August 2007, it was sealed off again. So a year after Madeleine's abduction, Kate was actually looking through the files from the Portuguese police and found a letter which said that obviously when the adults had made this booking, this reservation for the table every night, it was written down in a book on reception, and this book was actually accessible to both staff and guests. The receptionist had actually noted down that they wanted to dine close to their apartments because they were leaving their children in the apartments. Shortly after 10 p.m, Rachel had gone to Jane's apartment to tell her that Madeleine had been taken. Obviously, these are the other couples on the holiday with them, and Tana had responded, "Oh my god, I saw a man carrying a little girl." Tana claims that around 9 p.m, she had left the tapas restaurant to go and check on her daughter. She had actually passed Jerry in the street just as he was returning from his 9:05 check. This was when Jerry was speaking to that man outside of the apartment complex, but none of the men recalled seeing Tana, which baffled the police a little bit because this street was so narrow, kind of difficult to miss someone walking past you. Police did actually believe that she'd fabricated this sighting of this man. But however, this statement did actually lead to the first suspect being found. The child in the man's arms was described as wearing floral pajamas. They were pink pajamas, quite similar to Madeleine's. Man is tall, white, dark haired and about 5'7". That he looked as if he was Mediterranean. 40 years old. He had on a dark jacket and gold and beige trousers. She said that he had unkept jet black hair, that he didn't look like a tourist. She did say that the child was barefoot and did not have a blanket. This sighting was significant because it allowed for a timeline of Madeleine's disappearance to be made. However, in 2013, this sighting was dismissed as this man was identified as a British tourist. He was said to have been returning to his own apartment that evening with his daughter after picking her up from the childcare services that were available at the Ocean Club. Side note, so you're telling me these people that came on this holiday, there was actually childcare services available and they still left their children alone in a foreign country. That's all I'm saying. So this now also meant that their main suspect, their main lead, was now out the window. However, there was actually another sighting. There was another sighting of a man carrying a child on the night of Madeleine's disappearance. It was a couple who I'll refer to as the Smiths, who said that they saw this man, and they said that they saw him around 10 p.m. and apparently they saw him about 500 yards from the Madeleine's apartment. So he was walking in the opposite direction of the Mccanns, away from the Ocean Club. He was said to have been carrying a young blonde girl in light-coloured pyjamas with bare feet. They described him to look as if he is in his mid-30s, between 5'7" and 5'9" tall. They said he was slim and had short brown hair, cream or beige trousers. He didn't look like a tourist and seemed uncomfortable carrying the child. To me, this just sounds like they're describing the exact same man as before. However, police didn't go this way with it. They suspected it was a completely different person. I don't know whether it's because it was different times that they were seeing. I'm not too sure. But either way, they did come up with a composite sketch of this person. This was created in 2008 but published in 2013. So let's get into the full investigations that have been done. So it was deemed that British police would support the Portuguese police in the investigation. There's lots of different agencies involved in this investigation. Obviously, it was a big one. 12 days after Madeleine's initial disappearance that the first suspect was named. This was 34-year-old Robert Morat, a British Portuguese property consultant. He was originally from the UK but was living in his mother's apartment. It was known as Casa Liliana. This was 150 yards from apartment 5A where the Mccanns were staying. So Robert obviously spoke both British and Portuguese, and he'd actually put himself in this investigation, which is actually quite common for perpetrators to try and get involved in the investigation. He'd actually offered to be a translator. He wanted to help support the investigation because he actually had a daughter in England that was around the same age as Madeleine, frequently turning up at the police station, and he was very eager to get himself involved in the investigation. This is what caused suspicion originally for the police. So all of the adults that went on this holiday are often referred to the Tapas 7. So if I refer to them as a group, that's what I will call them. 3 of the Tapas 7, they actually saw Robert outside of the Ocean Club that night, as did one of the nannies at the Ocean Club, as well as 2 British holidaymakers. Around the same time as this, a woman speaking fluent Portuguese made an anonymous call to the police. This woman had actually stated on this phone call that a man named Robert had abducted Madeleine. He claimed that Robert often visited explicit chats online. So his home, pool, cars, technology, everything was searched. His garden was examined with ground radar and sniffer dogs. All results were inconclusive. His car was then found on fire, and on the pavement next to his car, somebody had written fala, which is Portuguese for speak. Sorry, it was not his car, it was his web designer's car. This man was obviously questioned and had all of his hard drives searched, but they were actually all wiped. He claims innocence and claims that police actually beat him during his interrogation. He claims that they were trying to force a confession. Ultimately, Robert was cleared. There just wasn't any evidence to prove he had any kind of involvement. He'd actually received £600,000 worth of settlements, while his web designer, Sergey, received £100,000. I feel like this theory is a bit of a tricky one. Some people believe he was involved, a lot of people don't. It is suspicious intervening yourself into such a massive investigation. However, maybe he genuinely was just trying to help. And police were initially suspicious because the Tapas 7 pointed him out. This may bear absolutely no relevance, but Fiona, one of the Tapas 7, her husband, actually really strongly resembled Robert. And it was Fiona that first pointed out the sighting of Robert. However, both her and Fiona had said that they'd seen him, but neither of them actually mentioned him in their initial statements. Later on, an article in a Portuguese magazine was published, and this article was basically accusing the Tapas 7 of being swingers, of being in on Madeleine's disappearance. This whole publication just highlighted so many inconsistencies in all of their statements and claimed that Tanner's reported sightings were staged in order to get the attention off them. Statements were inconsistent when the Mccanns were saying whether they used the front door or the back door to access the apartment. Jerry originally stated that they entered through the locked front door and later claimed that they actually used the unlocked patio doors, which, why were they even left unlocked? As well, the police did question why Kate actually left the twins in the room again when figuring out that Madeleine was missing. She could have called out from the balcony. She could have literally used her phone. Another inconsistency is what Jerry said about the shutters on the window. He claimed that the shutters could be opened from the outside, whereas it was found that they could actually only be opened from the inside, from like a strap that you pull. Obviously, Kate had said that when she'd originally put Madeleine and the twins to bed that the shutter was closed, but then when she returned and found Madeleine missing that it was open. Then later, Jerry said that he tried shutting the shutters from the inside and going back outside to open them, and he could not lift them from the outside. Ultimately, the Portuguese police did rule that the shutters could not be lifted from the outside without real force. And obviously, at the time of Madeleine's disappearance, there was no signs of forced entry, there was no damage to the shutters, there wasn't even as much as a fingerprint on them. Also, a notebook found by police which had like a written timeline of the events of that night. This notebook did belong to the Mccanns, and this written timeline was never given to police, which was highly suspicious. Police took this as if they'd sort of been conversing over the timeline before events took place. Obviously, with so many inconsistencies from the Mccanns, the police did start doubting the whole abduction story. Kate's statement herself that night, immediately saying they've taken her, was also deemed very suspicious by police, in the sense that it just seems like a bit of a strange thing to say. They makes it sound like you know somebody's taken her, you even might know who. It does just seem very certain when she in fact doesn't know what's happened, or shouldn't. July 31st, 2007, sniffer dogs were brought back to the apartment. These dogs were also taken to the local waste site as well as the beach to try and sniff out any sign of Madeleine. One of these sniffer dogs was trained to smell human blood and one was trained to smell human remains. There were absolutely no alerts at the beach or wasteland. However, both of the dogs alerted behind the living room sofa in the apartment that the Mccanns were staying at. One of them also did alert to the wardrobe in the main bedroom. One of them also did alert to Cuddle Cat, which was Madeleine's teddy, which was placed in the living room. The police had taken all of the Mccanns' belongings, their clothing, everything, and one of these dogs again alerted to these boxes of belongings. On August 6th, the police seized the car that the Mccanns had rented while on this holiday. So they'd parked this car in an underground car park lined up with 10 cars total. These cars were parked 20 to 30 feet apart. One of the dogs alerted to the driver's side of the Mccanns' car. None of the other cars that were there, the Mccanns' car. And the other one alerted to the trunk of the car and the right side of the car. Just bear in mind that these dogs are both sniffing for different things. One sniffing for an unalive person, one sniffing for just blood. One of the places where these dogs alerted was where the key went into the car. So the car key was then put in a bucket of sand and put on another floor of the car park, and the dog still alerted to this bucket. Now, this is obviously suspicious in itself, but what is 10 times more suspicious and kind of seals the deal for what I think happened in this case is that this car was actually rented by the Mccanns 3 weeks after Madeleine's disappearance. So obviously at this point, police are questioning, has a corpse been present in this car? Is it Madeleine's corpse? And why would it be there 3 weeks after she went missing? As stated, the scent could have been transferred. Obviously, it was found on Kate's belongings. It was found on Madeleine's Cuddle Cat. Hair and other fibres were collected from the apartment and sent to obviously forensic. Unfortunately, these samples were too contaminated and degraded to actually get any results from. DNA found in the car that was rented by the Mccanns actually found to have 15 of the same DNA compartments, the same as Madeleine's. Ultimately, it was ruled that they could not say for certainty that Madeleine's DNA was found in this car. Despite that, Jerry was undergoing an 8-hour interrogation at this point, and police had said to him nonetheless that Madeleine's DNA was found in the car. I mean, it was a pretty close match, they just couldn't say for certain. However, I'm almost certain they aren't actually allowed to lie. There was a lot of speculation at this point that the police had questioned Kate on themselves. They hypothesised that Kate might have sedated her daughter. Both Kate and Jerry are doctors. So at this point, police, as well as the public, are running with a theory that they'd sedated the children to keep them asleep while they were out at the tapas restaurant, and that maybe they'd accidentally overdosed Madeleine, and this whole abduction was some sort of cover-up. Quite a wealthy family, they were doctors, they didn't want to lose their license, they didn't want to go to prison for doing this. This was and still is one of the biggest theories in this case. Portuguese police actually deem Kate and Jerry to be suspects. However, they were still allowed to leave Portugal. They did so immediately. They returned home on the 9th of September 2007. At this point, Chief of Portuguese Police actually comes out and says that Madeleine had died in apartment 5A after an accident. He suggested that the Mccanns fabricated the abduction story and that they fabricated even checking on the children when they were out. And that the Tapas 7 actually took part in misleading the police on where to look. This report by the chief actually also said that the Mccanns staged an abduction, concealed Madeleine's body for a month, and eventually retrieved her body to transport it in their rented car. One of the officers working this case claimed that the British police were only following leads that favoured the Mccanns, that went with what they were saying. So at this point, this officer was actually removed from the case. In December 2007, a reconstruction with the Mccanns and the Tapas 7 was planned, but the Mccanns actually declined this reconstruction. It was then later released that there was actually no evidence relating the Mccanns to Madeleine's disappearance. In 2011, Operation Grange was launched, and this was to delve into the investigations into Madeleine's disappearance and see what was done right, what was done wrong, was anything missed. At this point, there was a total of 37 people working this case. They used mobile phone tracking and cooperation from over 30 countries to analyse data from thousands of phones that were near the scene at the time of Madeleine's abduction. In 2012, an age-progressed picture of Madeleine was released. If you don't know what this means, it's basically, this is what they suspected she would look like at 9 years old. In 2015, this inquiry was actually scaled back to just 4 officers. Their main focus was to find any leads that could be important, that could do with some more investigating, but literally no leads were found. That's as far as the investigating goes. Let's look at some of the theories. As I said, one of the main theories is that Madeleine had actually died in the apartment due to some sort of tragic accident. The Mccanns then concealed her body, staged this abduction, got her body again a month later in that rented car, and disposed of her body somewhere. Obviously, the DNA, the sniffer dogs, all of that backs this sort of theory, but in the end, there is no sort of evidence to actually link the Mccanns to being involved with Madeleine's disappearance. There are quite a lot of videos out there on YouTube if you just search, where there's speech and language therapists or analysts analysing interviews with the Mccanns. I do feel like this is one of the theories that a lot of people do genuinely believe. As much as I hate to say it, I have always been a strong believer that Madeleine's parents had some sort of involvement in her disappearance. Sorry. I do also believe that regardless of whether they were actually involved or not, Kate and Jerry should have been done for neglect. Regardless, this would not have happened if they hadn't had left their children unattended, uncared for, in a foreign country, in a place they've never been before, in a place they don't know. Left the patio doors unlocked. I struggle to get sympathy for these parents because this is child neglect. One of the liaison officers that were actually working between the Mccanns and the Portuguese police had said that the Mccanns' behaviour was very, very suspicious. They ignored police when they were telling them to not release certain information about Madeleine's disappearance, because obviously it could hinder the investigation. If there is a perpetrator out there, it tells them what they know. They completely ignored that, and they kept releasing more and more information to the media when the police kept saying, this is hindering the investigation, you need to stop. And this is ultimately what turned Madeleine's case into a media frenzy. And then obviously the dogs alerted to 13 different areas for human remains. Obviously you cannot be 100% reliant on these dogs, but when there's so many alerts to different areas, it's very unlikely that every single one was incorrect. And then obviously their vehicle was the only one that the dogs alerted to out of all of them. There was also bodily fluids found under the carpet in the front of the car, but they couldn't actually deem what these were. Jerry, Madeleine's father, suggested that the dogs were reacting to used nappies or old meat that had been transported in the car. But obviously, experts point out at this point that the dogs are trained to specifically detect human remains. Obviously, there's a lot of theories out there of what would have happened to Madeleine's body. Obviously, granted that she is actually deceased. People speculate, what could the Mccanns or whoever the perpetrator is have actually done to either hide it, bury it, did they throw it in the sea? I did not actually know this until I was doing my research this time around. While investigations were going on into Madeleine's disappearance, the Mccanns rented another apartment. When they left this apartment, there was a large black tennis bag, as well as a fridge, a whole fridge, missing from this apartment that they'd rented. Obviously, these are both items that could be involved in the hiding of a body. So obviously, if you run with the theory that the Mccanns had kept Madeleine's body hidden for a month before disposing of it in the rented car, it would need to be kept somewhere cold. The fact a fridge went missing out of this apartment once they'd left, it's looking very suspicious. Jerry had excused the disposal of the fridge as the fact that it was broken, but if you are staying somewhere that is not your home, you're staying in somebody else's apartment and there's a broken fridge, you don't just dispose of it, you tell the landlord. The dogs alerted to the cuddle cat too, and Kate decided to wash the cuddle cat before handing it over to police. This toy could have literally had crucial DNA evidence on it. Why would she wash it? For the main theories leading to the Mccanns being involved, either they intentionally unalive Madeleine, it's the less believed one. I think a lot more people kind of believe that it was an accident and that they've tried to cover up, and if this is true, obviously successfully covered up. A lot of people struggle to believe that it was an intruder, purely because no signs of forced entry. There was quite literally zero evidence left behind. The idea of them overdosing Madeleine actually came from Kate's father's own admission. He said that Calpol could have been used to sedate the children. The twins slept through Madeleine being taken. They slept through the commotion of everybody screaming, searching for Madeleine. Without sedation, it's very, very unlikely that both of these children would sleep through that. It's also said that there was an increase in burglaries in Praia da Luz at this time. Just 2 weeks before Madeleine's disappearance, 2 of the apartments next to apartment 5A had actually been broken in. So as much as Portuguese police are very, very suspicious of the Mccanns themselves, British police are leaning more towards the fact that Madeleine's disappearance was a burglary gone wrong. Obviously, Kate and Jerry claim that they left the patio doors unlocked, which easy access for a burglar. Burglar? You know what I mean. Relating to burglaries, why can't I say that word? Gone wrong. 2 suspects were identified and phone calls from their phones placed them at the scene. Sorry, there was 3 men, not 2. They were released after their arrest. They admitted to petty theft, but obviously denied any abduction allegations, and there was no evidence. A lot of people say that the burglary take is just insane. Literally nothing was taken from these apartments other than a child. So on the 3rd of May, the day of Madeleine's disappearance, there was men collecting charity donations at these apartments. There was no charity, they were just taking the money. This was investigated, but again, no connections were made to Madeleine's disappearance. Obviously, there is no actual evidence that Madeleine is deceased. With this, there is a theory that Madeleine was abducted for a childless, wealthy family. Obviously, if this was the case and someone had abducted Madeleine because they couldn't have their own children or for whatever reason, it's likely that she'd still be alive, meaning that there would probably be sightings of Madeleine. Now, if you don't know, Madeleine does have a distinct eye because she has a little mark in her eye. As much as they could dye her hair, change her appearance, that is something that they cannot really change. I don't know, I just don't think this theory sits right with me. What kind of evidence is there to back that? I think that's just something that people have said and ran with. Now, some people around the apartment complex had said that they'd seen some suspicious looking males, and obviously people had ran with the fact that maybe they were keeping a lookout for specific children that they could take. I just think in this situation, would these people be suspecting these men of this if Madeleine hadn't gone missing? Do you get what I'm getting at? They're just saying it because this young girl has gone missing. I don't know. So there was actually 36 known sex offenders in the Algarve. The area, and I quote, is a magnet for paedophiles. Now, an investigation was also done into a male that was found to have assaulted 5 girls between the ages of 7 and 10. Now, this man was carrying out these attacks close to where Madeleine McCann went missing. Similarly to Madeleine's disappearance, there was no sign of forced entry left at the scene. Police did suspect that this man was actually a former Ocean Club worker who was fired for theft. A cell phone was used near the resort the night that Madeleine went missing. So he actually passed away in 2009, and his widow had said he was investigated for these child attacks but cleared. He was only found guilty of the theft and drug charges. There's also a theory that Madeleine was taken by human smugglers and taken to South Africa. Was actually photographed in South Africa wearing a traditional South African dress, carrying a young white to blonde girl that resembled Madeleine, but she was later identified as a local farmer's 5-year-old daughter. In 2008, an investigation happened where it was claimed that Madeleine was taken by a Belgian paedophile ring. There was a witness close by to where Madeleine was taken that said she'd seen a woman holding a blonde child bundled in a blanket, passing her over to a male, put her in a car. And this is sometimes believed that this was where the abduction was happening of Madeleine, and then she was handed over by the original abductors and taken away out of the country. Obviously, as you can imagine, I'm not going to go into every single one, but there are so many sightings, witnesses, and people saying they saw Madeleine's abduction. They've seen Madeleine since. None of these have ever been credible. Madeleine is still not found, even being, and I'm sure you've seen it over TikTok, multiple young females who have claimed to come forward to be Madeleine. These have all also been determined to not be Madeleine. Some of them have actually been charged for this. Over the years since Madeleine has disappeared, there has been many suspects, many sightings. Ultimately, no one has ever been charged with Madeleine's disappearance. Madeleine has not been found. Madeleine's body has not been found. I don't think I have a specific theory on what I think that happened. I think I'm 50-50 between two, one being that the Mccanns were involved somehow, whether it was an accident that they tried to cover up. The only other theory I kind of think could have happened was that she was abducted, whether it was to be kept alive or not. But the second this case went so viral, so famous, there was so much attention on it. If somebody had abducted Madeleine, they probably got pretty scared pretty quick by the sheer amount of attention on this young girl. Probably unalived her pretty quick. This case just absolutely baffles me, how someone just disappears that way. If the Mccanns were checking on the children so close together, the time frame for this person who abducted Madeleine to just disappear that quick is crazy short, and I just hope that one day we get answers. Do you genuinely think that I'm leaning towards the Mccanns being involved? The inconsistencies in their statements and then their behaviour after Madeleine's disappearance, I don't know, I just don't agree with. Obviously, we never know how we'd actually act in this situation, but being a mother, I know that if my daughter went missing, some of the things that the Mccanns say just don't sit right with me. Like, for example, the book that they wrote, profiting off your daughter's disappearance, for starters, disgusting. Secondly, some of the things that were written in this book, I can't remember the exact quote, I'll put it on the screen, but Kate wrote something in this book about Madeleine, talking along the lines of her perfect little genitals. The way anybody should never talk about their children in that way, especially your child that has gone missing, potentially abducted for predatory reasons, that just doesn't sit right with me. I don't know. I'm very, very suspicious of the parents. But obviously, what do I know? Genuinely just think this case is crazy. Let me know what you guys think. I always want to hear your opinions. That is it for today, and I will see you in the next case.